Okay, welcome everybody to the session of Aarohana, where we'll be having a conversation with Hari Nair, founder of Holiday IQ. And it's going to be a wonderful conversation with him. We'll learn about the tourism landscape of India. We'll learn about what the challenges are and what the opportunities are going forward. Before we start, as always, the housekeeping arrangements for today. All participants will be muted. There will be opportunity for your questions. Please post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And please type it in there and we will pick up those questions and forward it to Hari for his responses. And if you have any specific question that you want to pursue after this session, please feel free to email it to us at aarohana@niceorg.in. And we will pass it on to Hari and then we'll collate and make sure that the responses reach you thereafter. You'll also receive an email which will have a feedback form in it, and we'd urge you to complete that. And there will be a certificate of participation that will be issued at the end of the 3-month Aarohana session. You need to participate in at least 75% of these sessions to be eligible to receive those certificates. Please follow us on the web at niceorg.in, our Facebook page at facebook.com/niceorg.in. We are also there on LinkedIn. You can search for Network of Indian Cultural Enterprises and you'll find our page. The link to the LinkedIn page is also mentioned there. And so once again, these are the housekeeping and a very warm welcome to this session with Hari Nair, founder of Holiday IQ. So this is the nice picture of Hari. And so welcome, Hari. And we will now jump into our conversation and talk about the holiday, the tourism business and what we think the opportunities are for entrepreneurs and others. So over to you. And, before we start, I thought it'll be a good idea for everybody to get to know you a little better. If you can just help us walk through your background and what made you start Holiday IQ. I know it's a little unusual, but it'll be interesting for people to get a sense of that.
Thanks, Sanjay. Thanks a lot for having me this afternoon here, and really interested in the initiative that you've started. I think it's an incredible journey, and I think it's extremely relevant in India at this point in time. So congratulations, and once again, thank you for having me today. So my background is a slightly different background, I suspect, from many of the other traditional entrepreneurs, or rather the more interesting entrepreneurs in the new startup world in Bangalore and Delhi and so on. I'm first of all not an engineer, technologist, MBA. I'm a chartered accountant actually by profession, I'm an accidental chartered accountant in the sense that I kind of, when I was looking around what to do, kind of stumbled upon it, and others were doing the thing, so I also did it and I passed. But what happened after that was interesting, because my first job after I became a chartered accountant was actually I spent a year coding with TCS immediately after I became a chartered accountant. And that kind of gave me a very fascinating insight into a world very different from where I was coming from. I did only a year because I realized that I wasn't a good coder, and it wasn't something that I enjoyed. But it was great insight. Then I spent 15 years after that in management consulting. Working with a bunch of different companies, starting with a very entrepreneurial small setup at that time in Delhi called Feedback Ventures, which is a bunch of guys from Ahmedabad who had set up a company for consulting. And all through my 15-year career with consulting, I did stuff relating to how to structure projects, how to finance them, how to create feasibility, have the strategy around that, all of that kind of stuff. And I ended up finally doing some work for about 5 years with KPMG. And as a partner of KPMG, my last big mandate was to help Government of India figure out privatization of the large airports. So Delhi, Bombay, the privatized airports that you see, a lot of the background work for that of all kinds was done by a team that I led. from KPMG. So that was the kind of background I had. And then I flipped and decided to move into travel, and that's largely out of personal interest and a little bit of thinking that tourism would grow in this country from being a slightly bit of a cottage industry back then to something much bigger. And I said, let me jump into it and see what it's all about. So again, almost 15 years ago now, I got into tourism and into a world I didn't understand because it was digital. So I got into tourism and digital, both of which I didn't know much about. And it's been an incredible journey since then. So yeah, so that's the kind of summary of my professional background.
Yeah. So pretty unusual, right? I mean, it's not, something that anyone would immediately sort of embrace, right? From a B2B industry consulting, privatization of airports,
Yeah.
management consulting, and then you chuck all of that and jump into tourism, which is really more to do with the end consumer. So what made you choose tourism and why and how was that experience like, leaving behind a cushy corporate career and jumping into something diametrically opposite to that experience?
So there are two parts of that answer, Sanjay. Actually, one is, of course, just just my life experience has been interesting in the sense that various occasions in my life I've had the opportunity to do something completely different, either move to a completely different place. When I was young, when I was just turning my teens, my father pulled us all from a family. We were all settled in small town Trivandrum, which is the capital of Kerala for till that time, and suddenly shifted to Delhi in the early 80s, which was a bit like going to Mars at that time. Uh, and, uh, and I sort of got used to the idea that change is kind of part of your life, and kind of started getting used to it and liking it actually a little bit. So I think somewhere there's a part of me which likes change, and so that's one part of the answer, right? So one doesn't really get faced by change. But more importantly, coming to this, I think I'd always believed tourism's got a great potential for India, for all the obvious reasons. But the more interesting reason was that the Indian consumer would become a big traveler. And till then, tourism in India was always a few foreigners coming to India in Delhi, Agra, Jaipur, the Golden Triangle, and all. And I said at some point, with Indians becoming travelers, there would be a whole new kind of tourism possible, and maybe there's an opportunity. And I kept looking at that different times in my career, actually. It's not that I kind of decided one fine day to do this. But at all times I said, no, this is not the right time. And finally, when I did, I realized that it was still not the right time. But in a personal sense of timing, I said, the further I kind of delayed it, I'd get too cushy in this world, and highly unlikely that I'd ever actually pull the trigger and move out. So I kind
Yeah.
of knew it was a bit early, but I still decided to move out for the next
So, Hari, how old were you when you started Holiday IQ?
So I was just under 40.
Just under
Uh,
40, right?
40,
And it's
yeah.
an important thing because there is this myth of this young college dropout, with a backpack and a laptop,
Yeah,
all of 18 or 19 or 20 years old who starts off, right? That's kind
yeah.
of one of the urban myths around entrepreneurship. What I'm trying to get to is that there is really no one age. It's all about your passion and what really motivates you to start. Correct?
Completely. I'm I've always believed that, me and probably a small handful of other entrepreneurs in India and you probably have seen some of them, Sanjay, who've kind of started a bit later than this classic, 18 to 21 type stuff. Absolutely. I think you can start at any age. And I think there's lots of material going around showing that in the US, there have been people who've been successful doing it much later. In fact, even later in the 50s and so on. So I agree with that. And I think passion is one. The other important thing, Sanjay, I think, which I must mention is that in all of this, the one thing that I think helps a lot to be able to do entrepreneurship is if you've got your health reasonably in place. And I think that's a key condition. Age, I don't think is a key condition, but I think energy and enthusiasm is a key condition. And I think that's very often linked to basic health. So
Right.
I think that's something to be.
So stay fit physically and mentally, and keep that motivation high, right?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
and then you jumped into tourism because of all the reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Help us understand what that switch was like, because you came from a very different world. You jumped, with both feet into tourism,
Yeah.
and this was a B2C business. This was digital, and this was in the early days of Indian internet. There was no real social media, all of it.
Yeah.
What was that experience? What were the challenges, whether it was in hiring, whether it was on technology, whether it was in customer acquisition, whether it was in tying up with potential partners? So all of that, what was that experience like?
So it's obviously all of that, Sanjay. But let me start with the really big one at a personal level. When you do something like this, when you have a relatively uh, if you're a mid-career entrepreneur, right, like I was, and then
Yeah,
you're jumping from something that you have, then I think the ability to give up something that you have is actually pretty tough.
right.
And you realize how tough it is after you've done it. And then I'll give you one vignette or one interesting anecdote from my life that, so as a consultant, one of the big things that happens in life is you're a big traveler and, you're traveling all over. And, I keep telling people that the most valuable hierarchy metric in consulting is actually frequent flyer miles,
Yep.
right? So, the more miles you have, for some reason, you think you're a better, you reached more. And so I was at that point in time actually one top tire in Jet Airways of that time and so on and so forth. And I remember the first year of being an entrepreneur, Jet Airways gradually taking me down every 3 months from that to the absolute bottom, and then writing a very nice letter. That was what I found very interesting. Where at the beginning of the letter you kind of felt very good, and then the last sentence said that you've been sort of demoted, so to speak. And so that's a small example of a larger thing that happens to you, right?
So
You become
ego takes
socially.
a hit, right?
I think ego takes a massive hit because socially you occupy a space, right? Normally, and then
Yeah.
suddenly you become just you. You have no organization. You're not part of this or that, right? You're just you. And I think it takes a little bit to be able to weather that. And I think I was kind of lucky to be able to go through that. A fascinating experience, I must say. And it's something that people should get prepared for. It's nothing to be scared of, but I think it's certainly something to be prepared for.
Right.
So that's one side.
Right.
The other, of course, is all of the things that you said. This is the biggest issue in tourism in India, and I can tell you even today it is the case that top talent in India from the top institutions of any kind doesn't go to tourism. They might even still go to travel today because there are some large travel players. But if I define my business as tourism, nobody goes into that for good reason. I'm not criticizing that. I'm simply saying, you don't get access to talent. So if I want great designers from NID, for example, which I think is a key requirement to play any kind of meaningful intervention in tourism, it's very difficult because you can't really give them a career opportunity as attractive as some of the other things that they might get, or even close to them. So or of course engineers and so on and so forth. So you have that challenge fundamentally that the sector has not been able to attract the talent, has not been able to storytell itself to be able to attract that talent. As a single company trying to do that is very difficult. You need a ecosystem of companies that are doing that to get that. So talent is always a challenge, in my opinion. The other very interesting thing, which is the other thing I learned, is that very often when we come from large companies, we are used to a certain threshold of talent. Like I was in consulting throughout, and I used to later on it suddenly struck me that in my entire consulting career, I had not worked really closely with people who are either not professionals or postgraduates. Uh, so I had not had the experience of working with relatively what you would call highly educated, right?
Right.
And that was a very different experience. And you work with all kinds of people from all backgrounds to make things happen. And I think it takes a lot out of you have to go out of your comfort zone to be able to sort of manage all that. So I think the HR side of it, the talent, etc., was probably a significant thing. The third is what you said. The mind shift change from being a B2B kind of thing to a consumer side. uh, I had no background in marketing or any of that in branding and so on. So one had to kind of absorb that, understand that, listen very carefully to a lot of people talking. But in retrospect, I felt that that was not such a bad thing because in India at that time, fundamental changes were happening in the consumer, and carrying on from an earlier understanding of the consumer forward was not necessarily a strength. So I don't think I kind of lost a lot in not having that. Certainly some, it puts stress on you more to know it, but that's kind of, in summary, I would say those are some of the big ones.
So, how did you go about building this tourism content travel kind of uh, play at Holiday IQ? I mean, what did you do? Because for those folks wanting to learn and know about this sector and to maybe start their own ventures, what are the important things they need to worry about? And how did you go about solving those problems?
So, the generic problem to solve right away is that the small team that you get in the beginning, right? How do you get them to, come and join you, right? So, and I think that's a critical piece. And then I will talk specifically about the area that I,
Yeah.
got into. But I think that's a big one. When you start, how do you get the first three, four, five people to sort of believe in what you're trying to do and join? And very often you don't have much money to be able to, afford to give up salary as incentive for them to come and join. So it has to be something else. Fortunately, I had a little bit of credibility simply because of the fact that one had done something else in life which was considered successful. So to that extent, that was a benefit, and I think that's generally a benefit for mid-career professionals, something that people probably leverage. Uh, the biggest challenge I had was that there's always a temptation to take relatively easily available talent versus the really good talent. And so one had to sort of make that judgment and I think compromise to a little bit, but to the extent possible in the early days, try to get the best talent that you can because it will change your trajectory fundamentally. Whereas what is easily available might not be the best for you. So it's obviously it's a balancing act, and you've got to figure that out. Coming to the specific project that I was doing, there was a lot of content involved in that, and it was very difficult, Sanjay, because there was no content about India at all. So if I wanted to get a listing of all the places you could stay, all kinds of accommodation that you could stay across tourism destinations in India, you needed to know two things. You needed to know which were the tourism destinations and what were the accommodation options. I'm telling you, there wasn't a single place that you could get this information. And this was the early days of the internet, so internet itself was not a thing. So, for example, I put together the first database of homestays in India.
Oh, I see. Interesting. Huh?
And when I put it together, uh, I I largely put it together from a book I discovered, published in London, which I finally had to get from London. In those days, which actually, you get couriered from London to you by
Right.
paying going through a fairly complex process.
So you
That
got
was
a
the
book
only book
about,
available.
so Hari, you got a book about homestays in India from London, and you use that to build your database
As a starting point of the
as a starting
database,
point.
saying that,
Wow.
you know what, here's because you got to find out from somewhere. And I went to all the tourism boards, and they had all no clue. They had not even heard of homestays. So and it's a classic early stage problem, right? In early stage of the industry problem. So yeah, so I got that. I put it together. I still remember four of us sitting. I think it was 2 or 3 night outs in a classic day and night sitting together and just getting the damn thing into databases. Those are all fun things about startups, right? You still have this sense of, building stuff by yourself and so on and so forth. And then slowly from there, it started to build. Then we took a big decision that a lot of the content about all this would then come from travelers
Hmm.
themselves and not through an
So
employee
crowdsourced
organization.
thing.
Yeah. So then that, of course, scaled the whole thing up.
Wonderful. And how difficult was it to partner with all the hotels, with the homestays, with the tourism boards, all of those guys, and to help you build out that business?
So the big challenge, so I will actually sort of divide this into the period before, very loosely before, let's say 2008, 9, 2008, let's say, and post that. See,
Okay.
before that, the Indian tourism industry was completely in one world that they didn't really understand what I was talking about. That was not part of their experience. All this stuff about Indians suddenly going to travel all over the place and online coming up and digital and all, none of this made any sense to people. And therefore, everything that I went and said, absolutely. I mean, they're all very nice and polite. I mean, like most places in India, but I mean, we didn't get anywhere with any of that. Not that they didn't want to help. It's just that they didn't just get the context of what we were trying to do, and there was no information. Post that, the ecosystem started to fall into place. By which I mean, tourism boards started to have a website. And therefore, they started to think about saying, okay, I must have something there. And therefore, they started looking for information and content and so on. So slowly, that hotels had the same situation. Online travel agencies started coming up, and then they had to do something of that. So it's very important when you start and when you're in an early stage of the industry that you need the support of very often competitors actually to build a sort of ecosystem of value, right? Where everybody is doing complementary things so that you can get some benefit out of that, and you can see. So that was a big challenge, and so it was very difficult, and it took time. The implication of all of that is it took time.
Okay. And you know, what were the two or three important things in your view that changed post 2008 that propelled you?
I think three things. One is internet. I think the internet started to become more real for people. So instead of it just being a website that somebody had and you put up some content, it started to become something that people started to use in their lives. And I think, and so that was I saw that somewhere in that 2008-9 period, uh, the consumer, sort of reaction to the internet change in India. And I think that was I think the biggest of the lot. Second is, of course, internally we started getting a VC ecosystem in India, venture capital ecosystem in India, and therefore I was able to plug into funds, much easier or
And you raised
more
money
structured.
from two marquee investors, right?
That's right. I got funding from two venture capitalists, tremendous investors, actually, very high quality. First was Axel Partners, and then later on from Tiger Global,
Right.
who both believed in the tourism story and the content proposition that we're looking at, et cetera, et cetera. So tremendous experience. Yeah. So we got money from them. So that was the second kind of piece that helped us, this thing. The third is actually the investment in a whole bunch of what I would call complementary players. So the online travel agencies had got funded and had been in operation. So Make My Trip and Yatra and Clear Trip and a bunch of others, et cetera, et cetera. So what happened was slowly an ecosystem was forming. So when you went out there and said, I'm a digital player in the tourism space, it was not that every one of those words was, some strange animal. People started stringing them together and saying, okay, I kind of get. So you are like, somebody would immediately tell you, so you're like Clear Trip, or you're like Yatra, or you're like or international, like Expedia and so on. So people had started to hear some of these names, and so that was very useful in breaking the sort of difficulty in knowing other people knowing what you're doing. That
Right.
could include, for example, employees.
Yeah. And I suppose infrastructure to improve, right? I mean, road connectivity, number of flights, all of that also helped
It helped, but later, so
later
so
on.
so the interesting thing. So if you look at tourism, so I'm talking about the business as of now, but if you look at tourism industry, what happened, Sanjay, was that this period from 2005 to 2010, or maybe 2012, something like that, was a sudden rush to build tourism infrastructure to meet an existing pent-up demand, which nobody had looked at. So, for example, Bangalore had suddenly risen up as a huge place of employment, people with a certain amount of income, et cetera, et cetera. And around Bangalore, resorts started coming up. So, if you actually go and look at and analyze resort capacity building in India, you will actually find that 2005 to 10 is when most of today's resort capacity got built. And actually, post 2010, maybe post 2012, it's become very slow. And that's a reflection of the market itself slowing down and so on and so forth. So infrastructure to meet a pent-up demand was actually the big initial opportunity that came. Of course, after that, then the other infrastructure, like you said, improved aircraft capacity, flights, roads, etc. But unfortunately, I don't believe that infrastructure growth was mirrored by a similar growth in what I would call the market, which is basically people with enough disposable income to spend the next amount of money on a 3-night, 4-night holiday in India. So that has slowed down in India, and I think it has slowed down over the last 7-8 years. Is the
Right.
overall sense that I
And in your experience, can you just break down the kinds of tourists or travelers that you have seen? I mean, from two standpoint. One is the domestic traveler, what
have.
kinds of travelers and the kinds of places that they would prefer and their own likes and dislikes with
Yeah,
regard to travel. That's one side. The other
yeah,
is the overseas traveler. Right? Can you
yeah.
just help us understand the two kinds of
Okay.
travelers?
I'll do that. And I think that's a very important question. Actually, there are three. So there's obviously the inbound traveler, the foreigner coming to India. There's a domestic traveler who travels within India. And then there is, of course, the outbound, the Indian
The
traveler who
outbound,
goes
yes.
outside, which also generates significant business opportunity in India and probably, in my view, some of the best opportunities in the last 5-7 years. Anyway, so the foreign traveler coming to India is a very small number. There are various numbers that you go around, but I would say that if you take out the exceptional year this year, would typically be in the 3.5 to 4 million people who come annually as classic tourists, which is an extremely small number for a country like India. So it has never grown in this country, in spite of hundreds of thousands of crores that we have spent as a country on promoting, but our numbers are remain extremely, extremely low. So as a business proposition, it has not been worthwhile, and nobody has made any serious money on that. And I mean, I'm unable to see what would change dramatically in the next some time for that to fundamentally alter. It could, but I think that the difficulty thresholds have just gone up with all of what's going on now. So that's one part. Uh, Domestic tourism, that is travelers traveling within India, exploded in the last 2 decades, right, or 15 years certainly. And very broadly, there are two types of travelers there in domestic travel. One is somebody who goes for a classic holiday, by which I mean, I'm stressed, I work very hard, etc., etc. I'm looking for a break different from what I do daily that allows me to sort of de-stress from my work, etc., etc. Go away somewhere, come back refreshed. That's one category. The other very large category, and massively larger category, is very broadly I would call pilgrimage, which is people going to temples and various kinds of sort of spiritual stroke religious travel, the number of which is extraordinarily large, right? So if the largest tourism destinations in India in the states, actually, if you include that in tourism, would be places like Tamil Nadu and Andhra and UP, simply because of the very large religious destinations that they have, Tirupati, for example, and so on. I'll leave that for a moment and come to the first one, which is the classic tourism holiday kind of this thing. And there the customer is largely couple with a kid, going largely from one of the top 6 cities of India on a relatively short break. And I would say a relatively short break being 2 nights to 3 nights is the vast majority of the market. There are other parts of the market, people who go for longer visits, etc. But in terms of numbers, both in terms of number of nights as well as in rupees, this is where the market is.
And what do you think of all the newer, let's say, uh, uh, attributes that people are looking for in tourism? For example, adventure tourism, wildlife, or ecotourism. I go out someplace in the northeast, and so I go and spend some time there, check out the Hornbill Festival in Nagaland and all that. So what do you think of all of that? Adventure, whitewater rafting, mountains, because India's got so much to offer. What do you think are the different kinds of tourism that can be offered, and what is holding us back?
So I think all of the things that you're saying actually are A, possible, and B, to some extent have been tried also. I mean, so it's not that, like you said, Northeast, or the festival kind of tourism, to the whitewater rafting in Rishikesh, to beer billing where you can do hang gliding and various things. There are two challenges, in my opinion. One, of course, is the deeper challenge of saying we are a cost-conscious, price-sensitive market. The moment you cross a certain number of the market, relatively small number of the market. And in India, there are still inefficiencies in the system such that you cannot provide these things at a relatively low cost. They will start to become relatively high cost. And again, I use the word relatively because if you convert it into an international context, these are not high costs, but certainly in an Indian income context or how much people want to spend, it won't be an irrelevant cost. So cost, I think, is still a significant aspect of it. The second big issue is that we have not been able to diversify the number of destinations that we do these things. Again, I think that's kind of related to infrastructure. So what happens is that individual destinations can take only so much. And so you do these things at one particular destination, take Rishikesh and whitewater rafting, and then after a point, the destination starts to degrade. And then there is this, negative cycle of saying, it doesn't make sense to go there, and so it's not such a great experience. The implication of that is that people will then start doing the same things outside India. So how can we do these things at a more efficient price point? And how can we diversify this across many more destinations, which are all possible actually in terms of destinations? We have those destinations, are the two challenges that we have not solved. And I think both are kind of intrinsically linked to infrastructure. And then, of course, there are some finance and other kind of issues relating to land acquisition and so on, which are technical. But I think very loosely, I think it's still the infrastructure.
Right. So, and also, I suppose, given the increase in disposable income that you referred to, that would certainly help people plan their vacation time better than what they're currently doing, right?
You mean over time, if the disposable income
Yeah,
increases,
because
you're
it,
saying?
yeah, I mean, as the country starts growing, disposable income will start increasing, and that augurs well. And but like you said, the issue of infrastructure and related to that is all the development of the destinations, right? Otherwise, people will lose interest.
So there are 2 points in that, Sanjay. I think, in the last few years, one of the things I noticed was that uh, while incomes are growing, I'm not seeing a concurrent increase in the number of people who, a very massive increase in the number of people who are in that sort of mid to upper pool of salary and income who then will normally sort of spur tourism of this kind. What I mean is that the IT revolution happened in India 10 years ago, right? More than that, maybe 20 years ago. The Infosys and the Wipros and the whole massive growth and a whole new sort of vector of employment coming and a certain kind of employment and jobs and so on coming. I don't know whether we've had one big thing like that since then, which then got a whole lot of new people into a certain kind of income bracket, which then could sort of spur growth in tourism. My suspicion is that is not happening, and I think that's one of the things holding back tourism. So while
Is it
we are
because more
talking about,
people? Is it because more people are traveling outside? It's cheaper to go to Thailand than it is to Delhi from Bangalore.
there are 2 points that is certainly there, but also that just the number of people getting into that income bracket, number of people. I'm saying growth is happening, and maybe that's not getting spread into a large number of new people who are getting that income. Is one hypothesis that I have. The second, of course, is the point you're making, saying that today from Delhi, if you wanted to go to Kerala for a holiday, it's absurd. The cost is absurd, right? And you would necessarily switch almost by definition to go to, let's say, Thailand. I've heard, hundreds of thousands of examples where people said, we just looked at the numbers and then Thailand made much more sense, and so we went there. And so yes, and that's an infrastructure point, both transport and even cost. I mean, if you go to most places in India, resorts cost, let's say, 5,000 rupees a night and so on, 4,000 rupees a night, and for that kind of price, you get a very different proposition in, let's say, a place like Thailand. And so which is all underlying economics that's obviously driving that difference. So yes, infrastructure is one part, but I don't think it's the only part. In the
Mhm.
consumer side, the market side is
Mhm.
the issue.
So, when you started, you went through a lot of learning. You figured out how to deal with it. You raised money, and you built your business, and then that business, uh, was sold, right? That was acquired,
Yeah, yeah.
and then when you stepped out of that whole thing, and if a young uh, entrepreneur came to you and said, "Hey, Hari, will you mentor me? And I'm building a business in tourism," what would you say to such an entrepreneur today?
So I think today, from the time I sold, and it's just a timing thing. I sold in last December, and then within 2 months, 3 months of that, then we got into this whole COVID thing, and the world is kind of fundamentally altered. And I think I
First
would tell
lesson is
them,
timing.
even if you don't know it's coming, you should get your timing right. So yeah, so I was finally, I would say, in something lucky. So so that kind of, yes. So I think timing is important. But the point, Sanjay, is that I think the world is changing dramatically for tourism, and I think if you are looking to get into a tourism venture today, I think you really have to get a little bit of a long-term view of where tourism itself is likely to be headed. Because if you take the past and extrapolate that to the future, I think this is one of those circumstances where that's probably not a smart thing to do. And so I would be cautious in triggering things and spending money and time without having a little bit better or at least some degree of conviction about how the world is going to be. And there are very strong pointers today. I mean, especially now, a few months down the road of COVID. But I think that's important. to know, if you were to come and tell me that I'm going to do an online play in tourism, which is very similar to what a lot of people did, I would be careful. I would say, you really need to think about this stuff.
What were the top two or three things that you would tell a tourism entrepreneur, right? I mean, yeah, of course, be cautious, look at the trends,
Yeah,
all of that. But from
yeah.
an opportunity standpoint, what would you advise the person?
I think there would be two or three big directions of opportunity that are emerging, or drivers of opportunity that are emerging that I can see. One, of course, is that clearly remote work is here to stay, right? My own impression is that remote work is going to become much bigger than we see today over the next, let's say, 5 years, and a very large portion of the white collar work of all kinds, of all kinds, would actually move remote. You can theoretically even look at medicine becoming or parts of medicine becoming remote, and stuff that you don't conceive as becoming remote could potentially become remote. The implication of that is that people then won't have to be necessarily full time at home to be able to work, which means that as a tourism entrepreneur, you can potentially offer a place of, a tourism opportunity, which means go stay somewhere else, and not for the 3 nights or the 2 nights, but for 3 months, or a year. It's interesting. Barbados and some of the Caribbean islands have just introduced a visa, which is called the digital nomad visa, which is basically saying if you can work from anywhere, then come and live in Barbados and work wherever you're working, which is because it's digital. And so Barbados and places like that are positioning themselves for this. So tourism entrepreneurs could potentially create new products that are longer duration products. It's very interesting, by the way, when I think about that, hotels and all that will have to fundamentally alter, because hotels are today meant for one night stay or at best 2 night stay. And night is the important part of the stay in when they think about it. Whereas when you are thinking about shifting home, so to speak, for 3 months, it's not just the night. The day is as important where where you're going to be and so on. So that's one direction. Remote work resulting in people being able to live and work in some other place is an interesting sort of area of opportunity that I see emerging. That's one. The other is on more on the technology side. I think, of course, it's a buzzword and there's a lot of discussion on that, but I think AI is going to change the opportunities available. So I think, today what has happened in the last 10, 15 years is that every part of the tourism product, stock inventory is now digital. All hotels are digital, all activities and tours are digital, all air tickets are digital, all buses are digital, everything is digital. So soon you can actually build an intelligent mechanism that sits on top of this, which just continuously automatically figures out the right mix of propositions for you to book for your next holiday without any human intervention whatsoever. So it's like taking off where the OTAs leave off and then just doing it at a completely different level of intelligence. And I see that as a very interesting possibility, a kind of small personal assistant that sits on your phone and just does all of that on the fly without you even having to interact or even tell it what it needs to do. So I think on the technology side, there are, again, it's a directional point, but there are very interesting things that could potentially come. I mean, these are a couple of areas that I see. Uh, the most important thing that I see, the third actually related to how technology is playing a role, is that the box of tourism, where tourism ends and something else starts, is also blurry. What I mean by that is, we talked about, I think before this thing started, we talked about how there is a lot of digital tourism or virtual tourism companies that are coming up, right? So where they are, saying that, see Prague on, remote or whatever, right? So virtual reality and so on and so forth. So what you could typically get to is a tourism product that says it starts from the time you are somewhere else, back home, and then goes with you till the time that you're here. So in a sense, you break the boundary of what is tourism to include while they are living back home, when they are here, and when they go back. All of that is within the product called tourism. It's a conceptual point, but I think it could actually become an interesting way to think about product, tourism product. Today we think about product only what you deliver when they get to a place, or largely that. So you can fundamentally alter the frame of reference of tourism. So yeah, I would think that two or three of these big directions are emerging for entrepreneurs to play in. Can't hear you. Sorry, Sanjay, I can't hear you.
Sorry. We've seen the evolution of OTAs. We've seen the evolution of the likes of Airbnb and all that,
Yeah,
which is essentially provided more capacity, both on the supply side as well as on the demand side
yeah.
for people. How do you see that evolve?
So I think, so I don't know, so, Airbnb has done remarkably well post the pandemic situation.
Yes.
And so, initially, obviously, they took a huge hit like everybody else. And then since then, Airbnb has been doing well. And also, Expedia and Booking, the part of that business that deals with informal accommodation of the likes of Airbnb have also done very well. I think it's a pointer to where the world is going, which is basically saying, you know, uh, uh, all kinds of different locations, not very formal kind of, you know, stay and long duration stay. One of the big advantages that Airbnb's had in the last couple, 3, 4 months is the fact that people staying for much longer. So it's like instead of a short break, they're now staying weeks or months even. So that's a direction I think is going to grow. I would think that vanilla hotel booking, vanilla flight booking will be vanilla in the future, really, really vanilla. And I think it will be this kind of stuff that will grow. And the important things that will eventually drive the power of all of this is one area that is going to become the key in tourism, which is storytelling. So unless you can fundamentally storytell your offering, because it's not a brand. It's not simply saying Taj Hotels or Marriott or whatever, right? Which is a story, because you kind of encapsulate all that in that word. But here you have to be much more individual, much more authentic, much more differentiated. So storytelling is going to become an incredibly powerful. It's always been important in tourism, but I think it's just about to explode. And it's going to become really, really important. And one of the big benefits of Airbnb, I don't know whether you know this, but Airbnb in the last few months is the only online travel business whose marketing costs have been extremely low compared to the uptick in business that they've had. And that they themselves say that this 9% compared to 34% in Expedia, or in that range for Expedia and Booking. So the difference is huge. And the reason for that difference is the brand that they have built. But when you go and look at what does that mean, it's really the storytelling that they've done around the offering that they have and the different offerings that they have. So every time you look at a place on Airbnb, there's a tremendous, power of story that kind of that is there in there in that they talk about the host, they talk about the place, they talk about the destination, or etc. The whole storytelling, and that will go to a completely different level. So I think that's a big opportunity and a big direction. Sanjay, I can't hear you.
So what you're saying is that the plain vanilla offerings,
Yeah.
are essentially plain vanilla that won't, stand the test of time, with all these immersive technologies and AI and things like that, and the ability to stitch together a solid narrative storytelling that kind of makes the experience much more worthwhile, will sort of drive a lot of the tourism, right?
There's a single word, Sanjay. I want to leave that word behind for all entrepreneurs looking at this space, and that word is authenticity.
Authenticity.
You really have to. There is no one thing. You can be anything. You can do it. What to somebody might look like. It's in the dumps, and why is it there? But if you're authentic about it, there is a global audience that you can put it in front of, and there'll always be a certain number that finds that valuable, meaningful, and interesting.
Right.
And so you have to be authentic beyond everything else. So your internal convictions and your sense of who you are have to drive your product. It can't be just kind of business.
And this authenticity is relevant for for every segment of the tourism business, right? Whether it is sustainable ecotourism, whether it is gastronomic tourism, whether it's adventure tourism or wildlife tourism, etc., etc. Correct? I mean, and the it has to be authentic and immersive.
In fact, interestingly, Sanjay, it has to necessarily be that for all of those segments. But for
Yeah.
me, it's even more than that. It has to be that even for what looks like very vanilla parts of that experience. I'll give you an example. If you have to go to Sikkim, you have to fly into an airport called Bagdogra. And from Bagdogra, you take a taxi to Gangtok, and which typically takes, they will tell you 4 hours and it will take 6 hours. I mean, that's the nature of the thing. Now, in that 6 hours, uh, you have two big methods of playing that, right? One is a boring 6 hour drive from Bagdogra to Gangtok, or a 6 hour drive in which the authenticity of the the holiday experience already starts at the time that you come. So something as mundane as a taxi drive has to be infused with authenticity and can be infused with authenticity, and that's going to make the difference.
Got it.
So I think
I
it's,
think
it's it
that's
has
a
to be
very
thought through
interesting
at all
one.
levels.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting one. That is, every segment, every cog in the wheel,
Thing.
so to speak,
Yeah,
has to have a story and authenticity attached to it,
correct.
that the experience really picks up. The great.
Correct.
So we've got about 12 odd minutes on the clock, Hari. There's lots of questions coming in.
Right.
I will move on now to some of the questions that the participants
Sure.
have asked. And one question is coming from Deepa. She says there have been lots of dips in the industry starting from 9/11. If you're a tour organizer, tour operator, and so on, how does one manage the loss of revenues? How does one deal with that? Any suggestions, tips?
So, I mean, the simplest way to think about that problem is that the closer your customer physically is to you, the lesser the impact on revenue. It's a simple thumb rule, right? So
Right,
if you are a travel agent or a tour operator that deals with in India that deals with customers in the United States, the first sign of trouble that will vanish.
right,
If you are in the Jaipur and you're doing travelers from Delhi, you're probably the most resilient. Just on that point. But the reverse of that, of course, is that obviously the numbers that you will get from catering to American tourists are probably completely different from what you will get from as in profitability that you will get, are probably different from what you will get from doing Delhi, Jaipur. So what you have to look at is saying that this is an intrinsic character of the industry that you're in. If you're in long distance, you will be shaken by some of these events. If you are more short distance, it won't. And if you are long distance, then make sure that you have a cushion, financial cushion, that allows you to go through these things as they happen, because they will happen. And it's not even that they will happen, right? Things don't have to happen for this to happen. A fear has to arise, or a potential of something happening has to arise for people to say, you know what, I can always travel next month or next year. So you have to prepare for it. That's how I think about
right. And one question has come in from uh, Raghavan. I'll bundle it with another question from Venkat. Raghavan's asking about the tourism itself, in the sense that how can one combine tourism with, let's say, a leadership training program, so sort of a more experiential come business kind of trip, whereas Venkat says, can you talk more about spiritual tourism? In other words, it's not just going to a destination, but there's a purpose.
No, I think Raghavan, I think it's a great question, and Venkat, both these questions are really very good, because I think they point to how the future is going to be, in my opinion. And I talked about the box of tourism sort of fundamentally changing. One thing I was actually thinking about was this: that historically when we said tourism, the purpose was you went to a place, you kind of looked around, you got a sense of that place being different. You got 2 days of 2 or 3 days of a completely different situation from what you have back at home, and then you went back. But I think there's a very different tourism that has the potential and will emerge. So one thing that I think will emerge is the desire to learn, and people will love that as a proposition in what we today call tourism. I'll give you one example, and I'll combine the two to sort of answer that. Last week, Sanjay, as you know, I was in this place in southern Tamil Nadu called Srirangam, which is a
Yeah.
very fascinating temple town, and a very large temple. Uh, and I've been to similar like Madurai and so on and so forth. And one very common thing that you find in these temples is the incredible quality of sculpture of the past. What stops us from creating a school of Chola sculpture? which then brings young people from all across the world to work with a particular kind of rock, which you only find in India, by the way. Not only in India, but it's rare kind of thing. It's somewhere between granite and sandstone, which you get in, in places like that. And a certain kind of aesthetic that is there. So what I'm trying to say is the opportunity to learn something very authentic and very relevant to a particular place, which has got a tremendous heritage and history that backing it, as a part of the tourism proposition is how we must start to think about it. So learning is a very big part of how I see the future. And then there are other things like, community building. You talked about leadership, but let me expand that slightly to the idea of community building. So for example, today, let me take a completely different example. If you go to Gurgaon or if you come to Whitefield in Bangalore, you will find lots of people, young people and other people in cooped up in flats with pets, dogs and cats and pets, people who are essentially pet lovers. If you were to create a community space for them in the hills, for example, where they can come and stay with their pets, and it's a community of only pet lovers and pet owners who live there, and they experience the place, but in a context, and that context is pet love. You completely change the dimensions of what you call tourism, and you'd make I think a fairly compelling product proposition. So I think it's important to think differently, and I think these are great questions that I think we should push for, and not be limited to things we can see today like leadership, etc., which are all very powerful. But there are many opportunities.
Right. Question from Siddharth Sharma. He says, what's your advice regarding networking with other businesses, whether it's hotels or homestays or cabs, buses, etc., as an aspiring tour operator?
The most important thing that a tour operator does, in my opinion, and this is something that a few tour operators really figured out. The basic thing that a tour operator does is craft a dream. That's your job. The other things like delivering the experience, in terms of no glitches, etc., is critical. But if you don't craft the dream well, you don't have the capacity, you don't earn the income that will enable you to deliver these things well.
So
So
that's
as an
part of the
aspiring
narrative
tour,
and storytelling, right?
yeah. So as a tour operator, I would tell you, if you don't have storytelling packed, you actually don't have a game. So when you coordinate with all these people like your homestays and your hoteliers and so on, what you should be focusing on, and for once after the hard discussions on numbers and discounts and commissions and all are done, or maybe even before that, is the story that you'll be able to bring out from all of these things. And I think that's what your mind should be working on when you talk to these guys. And that's important.
Got it. And, you know, there are questions coming in about, let's say, travel content creators, right, in the post-COVID world.
Yeah.
What would be a quick tip to them?
I think you got to be. I mean, content's the single biggest point is what differentiates you from every other creator out there. And to me, the what differentiates a good content creator from everybody else is a very sharp understanding of the audience that they're creating the content for. And I think that's really, and I kind of connects to the authenticity point I said,
Got it.
saying that the very same place, the very same experience, the very same context uh, can be presented can be seen by one set of people in one particular way, another set of people in a completely different way. And so you're, being very sharp about whom you're talking to and bringing out your authenticity for that audience is actually the key. And I think today, for example, on YouTube, I see some very interesting new vloggers that are coming up, and they're doing a tremendous job because the authenticity and what they are saying just really comes through. And especially Sanjay, I don't know whether you've noticed this, but today regional language food reviews have suddenly caught my attention in the last few months. And it's just amazing the kind of sharpness and the clarity that they show in terms of the audience and how they are talking to them, etc. Very
Got it.
interesting
Yeah,
content.
good point. Uh, question from Shilpa Sharma. Do you think people are really ready for experiential tourism now? And if not, what do you think are the reasons? And how do you think one can sort of ride that wave?
Actually, Shilpa, I think my own view has always been that people are always ready for experiential tourism. I don't think people were not ready for experiential tourism. I think the trade has kind of used that phrase to mean something. Experiential tourism means X. Uh, the customer doesn't have that view. The customer says, see, what is experience? And I keep saying this to people, saying, what is, unless we know what is experience, we don't know what is experiential tourism. Experience is something that you put a person through such that they find something more about themselves. That's actually an experience, and it's an interesting way of looking at it that I've seen before. So in every part of the tourism journey, so to speak, if we can build, unique vignettes that make people go, oh, I didn't sort of know this, or I was not aware of this, and that results in reflection and saying, okay, how does it, and that results in reflection at that time, results in reflection later. Uh, I think people are extremely ready for that. Now, how much they're ready to pay additionally for that is a separate question. But I'm saying, but are people ready for experiences? They are not just ready. I think they want it.
So if you're saying people are ready for experiences and experiential tourism, therefore, has great promise, what are some of the things people need to keep in mind if they were to consider doing a launch a business in that area? You talked about this your visit to Srirangam and let's say doing a course or a program for sculptors or people to learn about something. What would be some of the things people need to keep in mind? Apart from the storytelling, narrative, and all of it, what else?
I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that the only way you're going to succeed in these kind of things is, so it's a peculiar paradox, and today I think the world is emerging where that paradox can actually be pulled off. Uh, that the better, the sharper or the more narrow or the more niche the experience proposition that you offer, the better it is, because it becomes more rich and meaningful, right? So the product you're offering, don't try to make it work for everybody. It won't work for everybody. It won't even work for a large number of people. It will work for a small number of people. Now, the challenge, therefore, typically is that how do you make that small number of people then pay for your, the business, right? How does it become a business? That becomes a business because now you have the opportunity to, because of technology and internet, make it a global business. And you have to look
Got
at
it.
it as making it a global business. You will niche, narrow, sculpture, chola, whatever, small stuff, let's say, relatively small, but take it global and you will find a market for that. So very sharp, broad market, broad, worldview.
Got it. So what you're saying is find those niches and go deep so that there's enough number of people from around the world who will want to be part of it, make it authentic, and with the real experience thrown in. When experience, as you defined it, is where somebody who goes through that process learns something about themselves, about their relationship with the world around them. Right? I mean, broadly speaking, that would be
Correct.
it.
Correct. Exactly right.
Yeah. And one question coming in from Sridhar Raj, he says, look, you went through the whole process of entrepreneurship. You started the company, raised venture capital, successfully sold it to last minute, all of that. What were the shifts in that journey with regard to your own business model or revenue model that you think are important for others to sort of be aware of or keep in mind?
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent question. I think it's actually fundamental. So there are obviously, for me personally, I think there were two challenges. At a very high level, there were two challenges. One was a timing challenge. I got into the market early, and so the fundamental question for me was that would I survive till such time as I was able to get something meaningful going, right? Because if you're early, that's a challenge, right? You burn
Right,
out,
right.
whatever little money you have, it goes away, and and then so for me, and the answer to that from my perspective was to shrink, become very small, be extremely cautious about cash, do a lot of things that were not, my natural sort of tendency to do it differently and very, etc., etc. So that's one, and I think that's a general. If you are in an Indian business context, I think that's a generally good discipline to have. Try to do stuff, uh, with as much conservation of cash as possible because things will take a hell of a lot longer than you think. even otherwise, even if your timing is right and so on and so forth. So that was one challenge, and I think this is how I handled it, by being very, very very prudent with money, and to the extent that even today, in my finance team, and we have a joke, which is saying that the accountant says my job is basically to say no. I don't pay, and things like that. So it's a culture that you build, which is saying that you have to be extremely frugal, and you have to be this thing. That's one. The other, specifically related to monetization, a revenue model was a different problem and an interesting problem. And I think it could happen to people, which is I started a content business, and I defined my business as tourism, not travel. And in that content, how do you monetize content was always a challenge. At various points in time, there was a lot of pressure in different ways to morph to a more typical model, which is a transaction model, right? So become a travel agency, become a whatever. So you have to ask yourself, how much do I want to stick to my vision and without compromising, let's say, and then be able to get hope that you will get a revenue model going forward. So I did stick to it for quite some time, and it did take a toll in terms of both the amount of time it took as well as the scale. Uh, and that's how I did it. So finally we had a revenue model which is basically generating customer inquiries and leads for all kinds of players, hotels, tour operators, online travel agencies, etc., etc. And finally it worked out, and we got a business going and running and so on and so forth. But it was definitely touch and go, and it took us some time to get to that. So I think it's a slightly philosophical question, saying how much do you want to stick to that original vision, and how much do you want to be adaptable. I don't think there's one simple answer for it, but that's a question you'll have to probably jump into. Yeah.
Great. So thank you very much, Hari. That brings us to the end of this session. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of people who want to connect up with you. So we will, sort of have them reach out to you. And,
Sure.
so this will be, anyway, this whole session is going to be recorded and will be made available on the NICE YouTube channel in the next few days. So we'll encourage people to take a look at it and learn from it. And if they have questions, is it okay if we sort of curate all of it and send it across to you? And if folks can then sort of interact with you. Is that all right?
Perfectly. And in fact, I do that on LinkedIn so that it then becomes
Exactly.
easier
On
for people to
LinkedIn,
connect.
you
And
can find Hari Nair on LinkedIn. Please reach out to him. And one last question, Hari, with regard to your next steps,
yeah.
just very quickly, maybe in 30 seconds, uh, help us get a sense of what you're thinking about in this broad category of wellness, or your next steps, or your next adventure.
It's a bit early days, Sanjay. So in 30 seconds, what I can say is that when I looked at ancient Indian heritage, and I said, what aspect of ancient Indian heritage is of value to people? Could I take out and present as utility to people? One area that came out to me was, in these days of COVID and other things, is the ability to live joyfully, which is a combination of many things. And there's a lot of stuff in our tradition, in our heritage, whether it's food, whether it is medicine, whether it is music, whether it is the arts, and so on and so forth, that enable us to live a more balanced, happy, mindful, joyful life. And my idea is to see how we can extract some of those things and create a product that's for the global market.
So thank you, Hari. So we will reach out to you soon to get to know more about it in due course.
All
And
right.
once again, thank you all very, very much. Please do join us on Saturday, the 28th. We have a double session on that day with Shiva Devi Reddy, founder and CEO of GoKoop, as well as with Shilpa Sharma, um, who is the founder of Jaipur, Mustard, and Breakaway. And a cultural entrepreneur who's been through all kinds of experiences very successfully, and an absolute veteran. So it'll be something that you don't want to miss. So see you guys all on Saturday, starting 4 p.m. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Hari. Thanks to all the attendees and everybody else. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjay.